It says Vayakel and it says Tzabes, so I hope I'm not going to get confused.
Guten Woche. Welcome to tonight's cheer. And for those who clocked in half an hour ago, I apologize, but please send me your email. I'll put you on the list and you'll get updates of the any rescheduling, especially as we're coming up to the change of the clocks. We're going to have to reschedule. We have our annual vote, whether we're going to go for Thursday evening or for Sunday evening. So we'll be in touch. First thing tonight we have is about, someone asked me about the minhag, is how about women not doing or avoiding certain malacha, certain activities on Motzei Shabbos, what's the source for it, etc. And how far do we go about that? So here you can see on the screen, we have here from the Mogen Avraham, El Yorabo, and then we'll have from the Piskei Teshuvos. So one at a time. The Mogen Avraham, this is in Siman Reish Tzadik Tes, the dinim of Motzei Shabbos, and it says that there are the women who, says like this, women who have a minhag not to do Melacha Motzei Shabbos, ain't a minhag. A minhag is only until the time the tzibur have finished their davening. That's what the minhagim, probably Isaac Turner, whatever, earlier minhagim and the Tur. However, it brings to Abu Darham that there is indeed a minhag of women to avoid doing malacha the entire Motzei Shabbos. This is also now looking at the El Yerabba, who was a generation or two before the Alter Rebbe. And now he doesn't even qualify women. He just says not to do malacha Motzei Shabbos. He brings a kol boy, the tashbitz. So there seems to be some kind of minhag of avoiding malacha, not rushing Motzei Shabbos to start painting the ceilings and chulu chulu. Right. Then we have in the Piskei Teshuvos, who is a contemporary sefer, says in many, although he brings that some say it's no problem to do malacha Motzei Shabbos, in many Kehillas, holy congregations, communities, there is a tradition that women will not do heavy malacha. Now this is a bit helpful because he qualifies what do we mean by malacha. It means sewing, weaving, okay, painting as in art, and other malachas which require intense kind of input. And that's the whole Motzei Shabbos, even after Malav Malka. Okay, so we have here various minhagim. I would say that nowadays, Baruch Hashem, doing the laundry is not such a strenuous. I know the hachana are preparing and sorting. I have to be careful what I say, but the actual pressing the button that they should start working, that is not such a big deal. So if there is certainly, if you have been doing it till now, that's okay. And also, even when there is this minhag, when there's a bit of pressure, the one can be mekel. But there is a background to this idea that Motzei Shabbos is still as we discussed a few weeks ago, beautiful sikha, that you have, although you don't have Kedushas Shabbos, but Birchas Shabbos continues in Motzei Shabbos also, and that's because the Rebbe discusses that when the Yidden were in the desert and they had the Mon, so the double portion for Shabbos, the double portion, so there was the Shabbos day meal, and then for the Motzei Shabbos meal. So that's the Rebbe discusses about the source from Lav Malka. So there is still the aura of Shabbos on Motzei Shabbos. There is therefore also the not saying Tachnun until Chatzos. After Chatzos is already considered the next day. That's how it's in the Rebbe's letters. Right, let's move on. So now came up this following question. One of our local fine Yidden, after 7th of October, after Simchas Torah, he undertook to say Kaddish for one of the Kedoshim. Okay, so now someone who he teaches the children bar mitzvah, And so they lost their child lost their grandparents. Parents are not so involved in saying Kaddish kind of thing. So he offered to say Kaddish. Now he's on their behalf. So he's asking, is it better that it should be for money, or is it makes no difference? He's not asking for economical. He's asking whether in Ruchnius there's any difference whether the parent, whether the child who needs to say Kaddish and wants to delegate, whether he should or should be for payment or not. So now, where would we find all of these dinim? So the main address for this is actually in Siman Kuf Lamed Beis. That's after the end of Shachris. So Kuf Lamed Aleph is about Tachnun, Kuf Lamed Beis. There you have a lot of discussion in the Magad Avrom about the Minhagim of Kaddish, and we discussed this before. Sometimes it would be a whole politic, who comes first, etc. So the address of this is in Siman Kuf Lamed Beis. In that long stretch in Kuf Lamed Beis, the Magad Avrom quotes Mashma beBinyamin Ze'ev, the mutav livnoi lahaskir echod lemekadish b'mkoimoi mishayoyim acher bechina. He quotes from a sefer Binyamin Ze'ev, Tshuva Sefer, who writes that there's a preference in Mashma. I actually read through that article in the Sefer Binyamin Ze'ev. I didn't see it clear, but that's I guess the diuk of Avram Mashma, that there is a preference that there should be by payment rather than it should be done for no payment. Now, as I say, it's mashma. There's no explanation for this. It's not even said explicitly. It's a mashma. So what is taka the svara? I can see, and in the Sefer Binyamin Ze'ev, what he does discuss the famous story of Rebbe Akiva, who sees a person who looks very blackened face and in anguish. And it turns out that this person was a person who passed away from this world and is suffering in the Eilam HaEmes. And Rebbe Akiva asked him, is there anything I can do to help you? And he said that he has a son, that if the son would say Kaddish, so Rebbe Akiva looks up the son and he teaches him how to read, then he teaches him to say Kaddish, and then he brings him to Shul to say Kaddish, and then sometime later, a few months later, Rebbe Akiva meets this Nifter again, who was very relieved, very grateful for the fact that his son was saying Kaddish. This is a famous story. So in the Binyamin Ze'ev, he discusses, why did Rebbe Akiva not say Kaddish on his own? Why did Rebbe Akiva not hire someone else to say Kaddish? Why was it imperative that it should be the child? So he's bringing here the idea that for a child to say Kaddish, for a parent, that's because the child is the offspring of the parent, was brought into this world by the parent. And the child making Kedushas Hashem, saying Kaddish, for the parent, that's a merit for the parent. A parent to say for a child is lav dafke. You see that David HaMelech, it says in the Gemara, in Gemara Soita, he was able to elevate Avshalom, that he shouldn't go to Gehenna. And the whole thing, he said, B'ni Avshalom, Avshalom, B'ni, 8 times he said the word B'ni. And the Gemara says that was to elevate him from the 7 Medur Gehenna and into Gan Eden. So you see that the answer already is given, that this was in the way of tefillah, but not as a Kaddish. However you explain that. So the question would be simply, what is the connection between this man who's standing in shul and saying Kaddish and that nifter? If there's a biological connection, okay, that he's the offspring. But otherwise, there's someone in a different part of the world, passed away, and this person is saying Kaddish. What's the connection? If there is, especially if it's a child who's giving of their money, which is their energy, and giving it to this person to say Kaddish on behalf, then that can be somehow some association. This is purely my own svara. Meanwhile, this came to mind, and I spoke about this on Wednesday, and one of our listeners sent me the following. There is an interesting Mazol Nish Darfin. There's a discussion whether in a case whether a son, where the child passed away, whether the father should say Kaddish for the child. And whether the father could have parents, doesn't have parents. And I heard that Rav Ashkenazi was adamant that the father should not be saying Kaddish for his son who passed away. Very, very strong about that. So in the Hiskashra's journal, so those who want to look it up, listen carefully. In issue number Tov Resh Mem Daled, which is 644, and in issue number Tov Resh Mem Tes, which is 649, there are a couple of articles about this, and they also have a letter of the Rebbe to someone called Yalov, and there's a discussion about Rav Frank, who's the Rav Shalayim, had some idea that a child who's under bar mitzvah, you don't need to say Kaddish altogether for them, something on but the Rebbe there, he kind of disagrees with that. And he says Kaddish should be said, but meanwhile there seems to be the understanding about the father would say Kaddish for the child. But that's not the main emphasis of that letter. It's and then you have other sources of not. So but that's an address where this is discussed, whether it is a good idea or not. There seems to be that a possible idea that the anguish of day by day, the father having to say Kaddish, for some people can be very difficult for them to handle. Reb Aryeh is sharing with us that he came across two versions of this story with Rabbi Akiva. One is whether the child said Kaddish, the other one is that the child said led the community in saying Baruch Hu. Either way, the word is that the son obviously was brought to Der Hayosher and was a zchus for the father in Elam HaEmes. Let's move on to the next question, and that is a shliach somewhere in Europe, as many fine shluchim do, lays on a generous kiddush. It's a gewaltige Gesach, because this kiddush, a lot of people don't necessarily make a Shabbos meal at home. And what if they don't stay in the Chabad house, they may keep themselves busy in ways which are not so Shabbos-dik. So they lay on a Shabbos meal, and they have and the people spend another couple of hours in a Shabbos atmosphere, which is a gewaldige Gesach. Meanwhile, what is noticed that they have a fish course, and then they have the cholent. The cholent is fleshig. And then you notice that some of them are mahader. They're taking the pasta, which was served at the first course, but not because of fish and flesh. Just they're taking pasta, and they're putting it into the cholent. They're taking hummus and putting it into the cholent. And he's worried, is there any issue of them in your bishul because of cholent? Might be like a dove or gosh or whatever. So he asked me the question. Yeah. So let's read first of all. This is in Siman Shein Yud Ches, the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, about putting foods in a kli sheni. So there are those who say that even in a kli sheni thing, if you put foods in a kli sheni, which is a hot liquid in a kli sheni, is also going to cook. This is only if dvorim rachim, soft foods, which will be able to cook also in kli sheni. We don't know what is considered dvorim rachim, or otherwise known as kale habishul, and possibly bread also will be under this category, and therefore we would not take, let's say, matzah and put it into a kli sheni of soup, etc. And this also applies to other foods. We're not sure what's called kale habishul or rach dvorim rachim. And he says, "V'yesh la'achme b'kulon levad mi betavlin shehitiru chachomim beferish litnon b'kli sheni." But seasonings are allowed to be added into kli sheni, and also liquids. Alter Rebbe says all liquids can be added to kli sheni. So therefore, let's say a cup of coffee in kli sheni, it's not a problem to add liquid, to add milk, cold milk, not a problem. So now the word which we're focusing on is that tavlin you are allowed to add in kli sheni. So there is a concern of adding raw foods to a kli sheni. Okay, so now let's look at this bowl of cholent. the bowl of cholent is made with potatoes and beans and barley, whatever, and it's got hot liquid. So I don't see that as a dover gush. Just to explain something, there is a concept of a dover gush, which is a mass of food. Let's say a kugel, which is a mass. There are those who the Marshal particularly holds that retains the status of Kli Rishon, even if it's been moved to another keli. I don't see that as being true largely in the case of cholent, unless it's a very dry cholent. Usually, if it's got a fair amount of liquid, then that would not be qualifying as a dover gush, number one. Number two, it's a chumrah of the Marshal, and the Alter Rebbe Kimat doesn't bring this whole part of dover gush. Let's come back to the main issues here. Is taking pasta and putting it into the cholent a question of bishul? Well, the pasta is cooked already, and therefore it's ein bishul ha bishul. Adding the pasta is not a problem. So you're allowed to take cold lokshen and put it into a hot bowl of chicken soup, not a problem, because it's ein bishul ha bishul. Question is about the hummus. Now, I'm not familiar whether hummus has been cooked before, but even if it hasn't, so the hummus would be like a tavlin, would be like a seasoning. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe has said here that with seasoning, it doesn't fall into the category of Kalei HaBishul, and you'll have to add it to Klishein. The Ikki, I think, though, is also that we're talking here about not whether he's allowed to do it, but he's got guests at the Chabad house, at the table, and they are other, I just described what the story is. And the question is, does he have to intervene and tell them, no, you mustn't put the pasta, you mustn't put the hummus in it? Or he can, ignore it. I feel that there's plenty of ground to say that it's not a problem. Let's move on. There was someone put up a quote here. So one of our listeners is saying, in the name of Rabbi Levi Sudak, that one should pay for a Kaddish saying, because in Shemayim, otherwise in Shemayim, the one who says Kaddish will get the benefit, not the neshama, unless the child buys it. But yeah, that's the idea which I was saying, that it has to be somehow the payment kind of links the Kaddish saying to the beneficiary, the intended beneficiary. Thank you. Let's move on. So what's number 4? So a shliach somewhere in the world, okay, we'll leave it at that, without identifying, he asks me that he's hired a magician for a Purim event, and one of the tricks which he does is with playing cards. Playing cards, I mean with the spades and aces and queens and kings and jokers, etc. So I responded on 2 levels. Number 1, hiring a magician itself is a problem. And then go about the playing cards is a separate problem. So let's look at one thing at a time. So here you have Yeridea on the screen. Yeridea Simen Kufayin Tes talks about the nyonim of witchcraft and magic and conjuring. There's a word here, oiches es ha'einayim, one who seizes the eye. That achizas einayim, a manipulation of the eye, is also forbidden. So there is a kind of magic which is using spiritual power, and then there is manipulation of the eye. And this is on the pasuk. It says, "Lo yisnachashu v'lo yiso'oinenu." So one of the translations of Lo yiso'oinenu in Chazal is achizas einayim, manipulation of the eye. And here you have on the margin, you have the shach. You can see on the screen from Simchatu Yud Zayin, he quotes the Bach in the name of the Rambam, that also achizas einayim, manipulation of the eye, even not with witchcraft, just through sleight of hand, swift movement, is also forbidden. That's the definition of achizas einayim. I remember once seeing a fellow playing with cherry tomatoes, and he kept on pulling more and more and more out of his mouth. It was just as if he had 20 tomatoes in his mouth. He was obviously somehow playing on our eyes. It was very entertaining. But that's what, yeah, if you look up the Rambam. Now, the Rambam, as you see, is not in Sefer Hayad. The Rambam is Sefer HaMitzvahs, which he wrote in Arabic. Well, that's irrelevant, I think. But he describes very much that kind of thing. not using any spiritual power, just sleight of hand. Now there is a tshuva in Igros Moshe who disagrees with the Bach, and he says it's okay, something on those lines. It's very strange. You have a Rambam who says that it's forbidden, and Moshe seems to be a little bit lenient on that. But the Pashtus, it is an issue. There is a letter of the Rebbe saying, now in the notes you have a reference to Nesivim B'Sdei HaShlichus. So in volume 2, I wrote a chapter about events, event planning, etc. And in that I have here an entry about this question, where the Igros Moshe is quoted, and also a letter of the Rebbe where he says, if you are having this kind of entertainment, it has to be al pi Shulchan Aruch. What does it mean that it has to be al pi Shulchan Aruch? Is there any leeway al pi Shulchan Aruch? So that's not such a clear thing. Here you have a component. It's not really a straightforward thing to employ a magician, conjurer, one who manipulates the eye. Okay, now that's one thing. Now then the other thing is about the playing cards. So this was his second question, which was his only question. He didn't ask about the magician. That was my interference. Now, you have the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch was written by Reb Shlomo Gansfried. And when he had longer discussions, rather than halacha, like a Tosfos kind of thing, so he calls it Lechem Aponim. In the edition published with the Mizgeres HaShulchan of Chassidus Rav, so he also kind of adds a few such kind of notes, and he included this in the Lechem Aponim. So just clarifying, this Lechem Aponim entry is not from Rav Gansfried, but it's from the Mizgeres HaShulchan. That's what it says here. So now this is in Siman Kuf Lamed Tes, because when people played dreidel, it seemed to have been a popular thing that people would also do other gambling together with the dreidel thing. And so he quotes here outspoken rebuke for those people who play with cards. And he refers to the Rekeach, Rabbeinu Yoina, Toras Oshon, who says you should fast 40 days for repentance for having played cards. Now, I did not look up any of those three sources. I'm not familiar with the Sefer Toras Oshon. He then refers to the Sefer Oir Yisrael. Again, I'm not familiar with that Sefer, but this is also quoted in the Sefer Nun Heishin, Nahar Sholem, perhaps. Again, I wasn't able to trace all of this, but he's saying that he discusses at length the union of playing with cards, and he says, Hayore is Dvar Hashem, one who is fearful of the word of Hashem, Yarchik Me'oven Zeh, should keep a distance from this sin, and he'll be given to him the bracha Hashem Aleim Yichyu. So that's the first 5 lines. Then he brings from the Kedushas Levi, from the Barditcheva, also in his droshes of Chanukah. And so he says you should know that every card has got a great tumor, impurity, and he doesn't want to go into detail of that impurity. And he says you should know how much trouble and obstacles there are through this game. One is that when you're playing, you forget about Hashem. And then secondly, I think I'm pretty sure that it's considered stealing. Of course, when there's money, gambling with money. And the third thing, you're metami, you're impurifying yourself. And it's something which one shouldn't want to associate. And therefore, he says, my brothers, my dear ones, I plead with you, they should not be, don't take this lightly. And he says, use the time for learning Torah, go to Talmud Chochem and listen to Torah from him, and then you'll have the light of the miracle of Chanukah. Hashem should provide us with the miracles and wonders of his Torah. So anyway, so the Kedushas Levi is a Barditcheva who generally we associate with being very Melamed Zchus, but here actually he's quite outspoken to keep a distance from playing cards. He says as a clipper. Now, the fact that people are so obsessed with playing cards, that shows you it's koyach haklipa. It's got a pull, And yes, it's got a power. And for that very reason, we should keep our distance from it. Right. Someone is pointing out that that Moshe is mekel, or some poskim are mekel if the entertainer shows how he did the trick, that should take away the issur. Possibly. All right, let's move on. Really, one can try to find other entertainers. We have here by the event like Baima, etc. He brings fire jugglers and tightrope walkers and all the mices. The magicians are not the only ones to get people make stuff out of balloons. There are different things you can do to entertain without dafke bringing magicians. Okay, so here, very interesting. Last week, we had a discussion about saying a bracha at the sink, which is just in front of the mikveh, if you remember, the mikveh door being open between the dressing room and the sink room. Then someone asked me that he takes his son for swimming sessions. And he himself doesn't go to the pool, so he's waiting till his son finishes, so he waits in the other room. So what's he doing this time? So he says, can I do my chitas in the dressing room? The dressing room has got, it's a large room, and it's got cubicles. Each cubicle has got a curtain. And so he's allowed to sit in the cubicle of his where his son's stuff is, and to sit there and do his chitas and Rambam, whatever. That was his question. And then, listen to this. Then I'm learning Gemara. I'm learning Gemara in this Omid Yoimi. So in Daf Yud, Omid Aleph, there's a whole discussion, Gemara Shabbos, whether you're allowed to say Krishma and Amerchas. And then he says, Bryce says you are allowed to say, not allowed to, and then talks about the inner room, the outer room. So I saw, all these things coming together. Well, so we have the discussion in Siman Pei Dalet. This Gemara in Shabbos Daf Yud is brought in Siman Shulchan Aruch and Chaim Pei Dalet, and he says if it's a brand new, when it said you're allowed to say bracha Krishma and Merchetz, let's talk about a brand new facility, it hasn't been used yet. Oh, the Merchatz Yoshon, that's on the top of the screen. If it's it's been used already, then we're going to identify 3 areas in this bathhouse. In the outer chamber, that everyone there stands is clothed. Then you're allowed to read Shema and to daven. In the middle one, some are dressed and some are not dressed. Then you can greet someone with the name Shalom, but no Shema, no Divrei Torah. Then there is a line after the Aleph in brackets, Afilu b'shor she'ein shom odom oroim, that the status of the middle chamber being unfit for Torah and Tefillah is even when there's no one undressed there. That's very, very important for our discussion here, because his little boy is often at the pool and there's no one there. So it is the status of this chamber of it being inappropriate because it's a place where people don't undress, even when no one's there who's undressed. So that's Alter Rebbe's position. Now, actually, this is a machlokas of earlier poskim. And some earlier poskim say that if there's no one there, you are allowed to say Divrei Torah. And here the Alter Rebbe has paskin like the Bach, etc. And that you can see when they have this symbol, this Aleph, is the Kuntras Achron. And here the Alter Rebbe in the Kuntras Achron establishes why he paskin that even if there's no one there, also the status of being a dressing room where people are undressed remains even if there's no one there. Okay, so therefore we do have a problem for him to say his chitas, etc., in the cubicle, because that's a place where people get changed. So I looked around a little bit, and in the Piskei Teshuvos, he talks here about, also in Siman Pei Dalet, talks about the dressing room. If it's even, he says this, he says the same thing, it's got like the cheder and soy, you're not allowed to say brachas. Here is allowed, okay. And then he says, you Yesh lo al mi lismech. As I said, the Mishnah Berurah brings both opinions. And so he's been mentioned by the Alter Rebbe for us. The Alter Rebbe says it's so that's not okay. So in the dressing room, inside the cubicle, okay. What about, I spoke to the Ingaman today, what about in the main room, the main dressing room? So if everyone who undresses inside the cubicle, behind the curtain, so in the main room, no one's going there undressed. In other words, no one's going there with their erva megula. They may be going bare-chested, but not going with the erva megula. So therefore, in the main room, you can sit there and do his chitas. But actually, there comes this svara that you could also say in the pool, at the poolside. At the poolside, there's everyone is there. Is their erva is covered? So you're allowed to sit there with a sefer. So now, just yeah. So in the Piskei Teshuvos, again, he talks about this, and this is actually very relevant on the Frum beaches in Eretz Yisrael. See, people go there on Friday to the beach. Are you allowed to sit there with a sefer? Not saying you should sit there bare-chested with a sefer. You're sitting at the side, and someone else, there are other people there who are just wearing swimming trunks. Would you be allowed to sit there with a sefer? Are you allowed to say Dvar Torah? Apparently, the minhag is to be makel on that. Yeah, and that's what I was told when I was yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. Look, it says the following: the inyan haroichet, those who bathe in the sea or by pool, one can take the view that you are allowed to say brachas and dvarim shebikdusha in the water or nearby, because the people are not going totally undressed. So that's. I'm not saying it's chassidus hanhaga. I'm just saying whether it's permitted la'alocha. Yeah. Now, just want to pick up one more thing. Looking there, he writes the following. He says, the dressing rooms at the beachfront. So he says, it's b'derech klal ein mahalchim arumim. You're allowed to say dvar davar shebikdush. He made here a mistake, because his source is, he's saying here that in the dressing room by the beachfront, you are allowed to say divrei Torah. So in the dressing room, in a regular bathing swimming pool, not allowed to. But the dressing room, the kiosks, whatever, which are near the seafront, you are allowed to. What's the difference? So his source is in this sefer called Zecher Yehosef, and I'm going to read it. I'll call upon in Poshut. Dahani oholim, these tents which are near the river, which are used to wash yourself a bit with cold water as people are undressed. Loi kevi, they're not permanent, to have the din of Beis HaMerchetz. And he gives us a reference to Erev in Daf Nun Hey, and that's got nothing to do with Merchetz. It's talking there about Yoshvei Tzerifin, people who live in huts, in these temporary huts. Ein moededin lohem. The question is, how do you measure for Tchum Shabbos? And it talks there about those who live in these very makeshift huts, that you wouldn't measure from the end of their plot of land, but just from the door of their huts. So he's saying that, just like you see in the din of Eruvin, that because it's a temporary thing, it doesn't have the same status. So the same thing, the temporary tent, which is near the river, doesn't have the status of Beis HaMerchetz. So this is really a crucial point here, that the leniency, which this Zecher Yehosef is saying, is if it is a temporary structure, then it doesn't have the status of Beis HaMerchetz. So therefore, this, when he quotes this to say that the dressing rooms which are near the beach are not a gather of Beis HaMerchetz, he's missed the point. He should have said it's only if it's mamish, a temporary thing, but if it's a built structure, I've been to Bournemouth, etc. You have these kiosks which are near the it may be something different. But the operative word is it a temporary structure or temporary structure or a permanent structure? Temporary structure, you have the heter, it doesn't have the status of Beis HaMerchetz. If no one's there, you could say a Barot Divrei Torah. If it's a permanent structure, then it's got to get a Beis HaMerchetz, and then you wouldn't be allowed to say Divrei Torah. let's move on. Just the value of, it's wonderful you got these malachtim, but then the value of looking up each thing in its source. Okay, let's go on. So now, I don't remember, we've had many mezuzah shilas in the past, but I don't remember discussing this one. And this is also very interesting because we're learning in the Shia, we're learning Gemara Yuma, and the around Daf Yud in Yuma, that's where there's a whole discussion about mezuzah, the placement of mezuzah. It comes to do with the chamber of the Kohen Gadol, where he was in his 7 days preparation for Yom Kippur. So it talks also about the entrance. So it comes up about mezuzah. Generally is discussed here. One of the few, 2 or 3 places perhaps in Shas where mezuzah is discussed at length. And the main sug is menachos, but here you have in Yuma quite a discussion. So now it comes up in discussion in the Gemara there about a doorway which the bottom is straight, but then it becomes a dome, a curved top. And so is it chayav b'mezuzah or not? And the bottom line is that yes, it is chayav b'mezuzah, but that now we have here a dilemma. Exactly where do we, what is defined as lintel and what is defined as wall, as doorpost? And here there seems to be a difference between Rashi and the Rambam. What's our question here is like this. The mezuzah is meant to be in the top third of the door frame, of the door, of the doorpost. And the Gemara says, "Mat tefillin begoiva, mezuzah begoiva." Just like the tefillin we put high up, we put on the head, so too the mezuzah should be high up. So the Gemara says the mezuzah should be in the top third. The question is that where do you measure in order to calculate the top third? As you see on the picture, we've got this door which has a round top, and the fellow who asked me drew a green line. Is the whole line divided into 3, or only the straight part until where it starts curving? That remains a dilemma between Rashi and Rambam, and where possible, you'd put the mezuzah on a level where it is within the top third from the overall measurements, and also within the top third from just measuring until where it starts curving. As you see on the diagram, which is from the Sefer, I think, from the Sefer Seichel Toiva, Sefer Mezuzah. So he's shown here the dilemma of where we would define the top third. And so if you can fit it, and it happens to be in this picture that the mezuzah being near the top of the straight part of the doorpost is it's in the top third of the overall also. But it could be that you wouldn't be able to accommodate both opinions, and that would be a difficult shaila how to pass. Because to put a mezuzah on the curved part, which is almost like putting the mezuzah horizontal rather than vertical, is also looks very strange. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so now one of our local people here in Greater London asks me that she has till now always been, she makes a challah, she takes a piece of challah and she burns it. And then she recently heard that it's, instead of burning the challah, you can wrap it up, double wrap it, and then you can put it in the garbage. So she wants to know, is it okay, is it not okay? So the idea of burning challah, what's the issue? Challah has the same status of truma, and it should be given to a kohen by design, but it's got a kedusha, and if it becomes tomei, so then it cannot be eaten, and therefore it has to be burned. And the idea of burning challah is mentioned dozens of times, well, many times in the Mishnah, and here you have it. Shulchan Aruch talks about minig haposhut to be mafresh one challah and it's burnt, and because in the times of the Mishnah they would be mafresh 2 challahs, one would be burnt and one would be given to the kohen. And then we have towards the end of this quote, we have that the yesh oimrim, when you burn, this is from the Ramah, that when you burn the challah, You should burn it on its own, because it's sacred, so we shouldn't be having benefit from the burning challah. And therefore, there's a minhag to throw it into the oven before baking. So it should be burnt before it should be, there shouldn't be benefit for the burning of the challah. So that's the Shulchan Aruch and Simcha Shin Chaf base. In the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, in Hilchos Yom Tov, he's talking about a person baking bread on Yom Tov. Today, no one does it, but it's for various reasons, for practical reasons. Much easier to use the machines and to use to switch on the oven, switch it off. But really, if you had an old-fashioned oven, you're using a firewood, and you baked a dough, you could bake challahs on Yom Tov also. So now, what do you do about hafroshas challah? So then he says in the second line, if you made challah, you should not burn a piece of challah on Yom Tov. It's a positive mitzvah to burn the challah, because Yom Tov is aseh v'lo aseh. And so the mitzvah of burning challah doesn't override the mitzvah of Yom Tov. And therefore, you are not allowed to burn it on Yom Tov. Therefore, you have to wait till after Yom Tov. Okay, that's the point over here. But what we're seeing here is saying it's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah saseh, to burn, like we know about karbonos, which were disqualified. It's a mitzvah sreifa, so same thing here. So now I looked up this person asked, she saw in some Chabad website where it says that there's an alternative to wrap it up and put it in the bin. And I looked up that website, and I was dismayed that there's no reference to this part in Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, where it says that mitzvah challah is reif. I wrote to the author, and he said that he'd been told by various rabbonim this advice, and this is because they've heard so many shilas of people burning the challah at the same time as baking the food. They felt that it's better that people should wrap it up and dispose of it without burning it in the oven. Be that as it may, the main source of this is actually in the Shuvas Minchas Yitzchok on Rav Weiss, who was first in Manchester. Well, first he was in Hungary, but then he was a Rav in Manchester. And later he became the Abbess in the Gaivid in Shalim. In volume Daled, he's discussing this inyan of the burning challah, he's disposing of it in wrapping it up, and he does allow the wrapping it up if it's difficult to burn it. So then this is an alternative. But I'm just have it on the screen. The conclusion, he says, certainly it's the from Dafka. Certainly one should be burning the challah as you have written to the person too. But when it's when it's not possible, then he says, okay, then you should wrap it up in paper and put it into the garbage can. So it's certainly, even the Minchas Yitzchok is the source of this. It's not a lechatchila to wrap it up in it. So now this person who wrote to me asked, why then, this one who has the website, why then, when it comes to truma, people that Israel buy fruit or vegetables, whatever, and they mafresh truma, now everyone wraps it up, throws it in the bin. So what's the difference between the burning of challah, which I'm saying that's should be pursued, and what about truma and etc., which people are certainly not so particular? So having read through the Minchas Yitzchok, etc., the answer is very simple. That for food to become eligible for tumah, there's something called hechsher l'tumah. It has to have come wet. Become wet with one of the 7 liquids, yad shchadav, and only then is it eligible for tumah. A dough is made with water, typically, and therefore the dough has become eligible for tumah. And because we are all tamei meis, the dough has become tamei. There's no question that the dough is tamei, and therefore you have to burn it. When it comes to fruit, did the fruit become wet? Did not become wet, etc.? It's not clear that you have some dates. Did they ever come into contact with one of the 7 liquids after they were picked off the tree? We don't know. It's a suffix. Therefore, it's not a given. And if they're not tamei, then you shouldn't be burning it. It's only if you know for sure that's tamei. Therefore, that's the difference why with fruit, it's not a given to burn it, whereas with challah, it's certainly that's the correct thing to do if it's possible. What I did add to this, as I say, someone lives relatively local, that in the front yard of the Kehillah building across the street, there is a large brown bin, which is dedicated for challah. People who want to burn their challah, they don't have their own facilities, they can pop it into this one of these like these recycling bins. But they do have a lot. Besides the slot for throwing the challah, they also have a slot for donation. So, all right. When I was a shomer, someone's writing, there was a non-Jew who wanted to eat the burnt part. Well, I'm sure you didn't let him. Okay, now I want to spend a couple of minutes on the following, and that is about shekels. Now, I don't know if you can see, but this was put through doors in this. I'm also posted in the shuls all about another tirade against shekels, and that's become quite fashionable from various sources, whether it is extreme elements of the Haredi community, and then you have also from Sephardic sources, but here it has become a new level. They have written that the Rebbe, as in the Lubavitcher Rebbe, is opposed to wearing shekels. And so you can see here the caption, Harebi, with a picture of the Rebbe, Motar lilvosh peah, with 3 question marks. And in the English, no parnosa, take off the shekel, Lubavitcher Rebbe. Now this is a total distortion, and I think it needs to be a response to this. And I want to go through this carefully. I suspect it's going to be difficult for you to read the full text on the screen, but you can see there is a letter of the Rebbe. The letter is dated Tov Shin Yud Ches, Marchesh from Tov Shin Yud Ches. So I'm going to read this letter, and it doesn't say the name, Rav Chosid Ishirei Elikim. They write Noisiv Noisen, which actually means Nichmed V'Naila, but no, or Nichmed V'Noim, Noisiv B'Tzochet Tzibor, Merina Rav, Sheyichya Shalom Uvrach. V'Mashe Koisiv Oidus HaParnosa. You're writing, this is a letter to Australia, to Melbourne. You're writing about Parnosa. And also Oid Eze Me'anash Sheyichya, also of Anash, others who are struggling with Parnosa. Eineni Rashai Lechasois Daiti Bozeh. I am not permitted to withhold, to cover up my view on this, my opinion on this, because it's relevant to others, and for matters which are so important. Daiti, who my opinion is, from the primary causes, for the lack of success, until now, is not so much the natural cause, of the economic situation of your country at the moment. Numerous have managed to overcome that difficulty. The issue is the shetels of the wives of Anash, although one can say, explain for their benefit of the word, not just it's actually true what I'm going to say. Because of what they got used to in our country back then, referring to Russia, it was very, very difficult to keep this. It became, because you got used to it, it became as if it's permitted. Then the Rebbe continues, even if I'm trying to say, how do you say, to vindicate, that doesn't change the situation. Inyan HaShetel and Ede Beseder Klal. The Inyan of Shetel is not Beseder. And he finishes off, Yirotzen, my words should be accepted. I'm not coming in a way of Kpeda, I'm not in complaint, but with the hope that hopefully this will make that Anash will do what they can to increase the Hatzlocha, what they can do to increase the Hatzlocha and success and for health and Parnosa and true Nachas from all their children, Simcha Tov Levov, and you find the appropriate words to explain all of these things that should become actualized, and the swifter the better. Bebrocha for good news in all of the above. This is the letter. So now, Inyan HaShetlan. So these people have very well. I'm not. They have taken this Inyan HaShetlan and said that the Shetel is the problem. We all know, Baruch Hashem, that the Rebbe was the one who actually pushed very much the Inyan of Shetlan. And in case you had any doubt, so I looked for a letter of the Rebbe from the same period, from winter Tofshin Yud Ches. Before reading this following letter, I'm going to say what he means by Inyan HaShetlan. Very simply, he means the neglect of the Inyan of Shetel, that people were not covering their hair, that women weren't covering their hair adequately. And when he talks about Russia, he's talking about that they were suffering and they were to be a frumayid on the street. It was dangerous. It was something which you got into trouble with the authorities, and therefore it was very difficult for people to be living and dressing like frumayid. That's what he's talking about, and he's saying that the Shetel, and by rectifying this, by wearing Shetel properly, that will be the key to success. So this quote, "No parnasa, take off the Shetel," that is a distortion, and so is the Hebrew caption. On the contrary, now, but just let's read, in case I want to share this with people who might say I'm, reading in things which the Rebbe didn't say. So let's take another letter, and this is one of, I'm sure, dozens of letters plus Yechidison. But he writes, this is, as I say, in Tofshin Yud Ches. You can see it's printed in Igros Kodesh, where you talk about the covering of the head. I've already revealed my view on this many times, several times, that covering with a tichel, with a headkerchief, and nowadays, is not a stable solution, because it means that every time a woman wears this, she has the challenge whether she should cover all her hair or only part of the hair, or oichum, or I guess even less than part of the hair, because she doesn't want to be, she doesn't want to be the subject of people's scorn, even though this could be just her imagination. But sometimes it's also been mitzvahs. Mashenkin bilavishas hashetel. If he wears a shetel, so you're not going to be able to remove a shetel when you're in a mesiba, when you're with around people. You're not going to take it off. Befrat, kefisha koisev mentions about there, they would shave the hair completely. And then then he goes another point. Masha tailor b'shetel megula. She'll be wearing a shetel without a cover on the shetel. There's several generations, and this is not seen as an issue, and you have to follow according to minhag hamokim, etc. It shouldn't be a pirza, but the inyan mitzad atzmoi is, he says, to cut the hair short and to wear a shetel is much better lo be'erech toiv from the other forms which have been discussed. So this is very clear, and as I said, this is one of many letters where the Rebbe promotes that dafka to wear a shetel. This is also accepted amongst the Litvische world. This is accepted in many of the Chassidish communities, and then you've got a very small but vocal minority who keep on agitating and putting this up and putting that up, and notices against the Inyan of Shetel, and it's let each community follow their leadership. There is a sefer published by Rav Volpo in response to Rav Mazuz. And with very great respect, Rav Mazuz is a Yedid of Lubavitch, a Sephardic Shero from Tunisia, and he writes about the Inyan of Shetlach. Bekitzer, Rav Volpo put out a volume about 20 years ago, 20 chapters explaining. He says, no, if that's your community, Gesundheit, a guide for your community. But in Lubavitch, this is what is the guidance. Now, then they have another thing, which is a Yechidus, which they write that some person by the name of Dubovik was in Yechidus in Tovshin Lamed Beis, and the Rebbe said to him that you should buy a sheitel from someone who's trustworthy, because there are problems and concerns with the hair from India. So, first of all, I want to point out the glaring contradiction. Here you've quoted that from Tovshin Yud Ches, the Rebbe is opposed to sheitels, and then you have in Tovshin Lamed Beis, the Rebbe is saying you should buy a sheitel, but buy it from a trustworthy person. That's number one. Number two, when someone comes out of Yechidus and says something, if it's not, the Rebbe didn't give it out in writing, we don't know what was said, what wasn't said. And if you want, I'll just share with you that a couple of years ago, the Rav of Bnei Brak, Rav Isaac Lando, came here for a family simcha, and I was sitting next to him, and I asked him what was his father's view, Rav Moshe Lando, what was his view about this whole saga of the sheitels from Indian hair from India. And he says his father saw it as no problem at all. He said he was not concerned. I want to just add a little bit who Rav Lando is, and that in relation to the Rebbe. One time, about 40 years ago or more, someone brought to the Rebbe a gift, a packet of ritzuas, of straps of tefillin. And the Rebbe refused that those straps should be put on the table in his office. He said, send it to Rav Lando, to Bnei Brak, to check it out. Rav Lando did not solve this mystery until about 20 years later. It turns out that those tefillin straps were smeared with an animal fat, with a non-kosher animal fat. That was like to make the gloss or something. So the Rebbe got these ritzuas, and immediately he senses that they're not okay. Now, as I said, this same Rebbe was the one who encouraged thousands of women to be wearing a sheitel. So there's thousands of women who are wearing sheitelach, and these people, and they also passed by the Rebbe, and he never made a public statement, a fuss about the Indian hair. Now, this Indian hair story didn't just come up 10 years ago. It came up also 50 years ago. There's a lot been written about it. And so people are coming up. I just see this as agitation, marginalizing other people. And this, you know what? When it came a few years ago, when there was this whole story with the Indian hair, so one woman took it seriously. Yeah, take off the sheitel. You say there's a problem with the sheitel, take off the sheitel. Rahman al-Islam, you have to be so careful with who you're dealing with, and you start giving out all these notices. Chachamim hizaru b'divreichem. You maybe actually be working against Yiddishkeit rather than for Yiddishkeit. And let each, as I say, let each kehillah follow the leadership and the guidance of their kehillah, and each one going their way. Each one will all get there, don't worry. One last thing, I'm speaking this way. I hope to also put this discussion available for the broader community. So that's why I'm kind of speaking in that kind of language. One last thing, which is about last week we had this discussion. If a goy boiled water, is a yid allowed to have the leftovers? So certainly to ask a goy to make himself a drink and then you'll have the leftovers, that's not okay. So someone asked last week, what about if in genuinely a goy boiled a kettle and and now you're in the same facility. A guy boiled the kettle for himself, and now there's leftover hot water. Are you allowed to have it? So here you have from the Piskei Teshuvos again. So he writes the following. This is in Shin Chof Hey. You have the discussion of benefit. Let's say if a guy has a bakery, if you wanted to buy where the kosher bread is kosher, etc. You know, the baguette, whatever they eat, like the French bread. It's not a question of kashrus, and you're ready to buy in Paspalter. Could you buy? Could you use a loaf on Shabbos, which is baked by a goy? That's the discussion. And if the city mostly is goyim, so then the bakery is baking bread on Shabbos is basically for goyim. Then you'd, according to many poskim, you'd be allowed to use that bread on Shabbos. Now, then he says in the Piskei Teshuvos over there, he writes the following: if a goy made for himself, but if he works for the Yid, even if it's not your worker, but he's a friend of yours, and he knows that when he's doing this work, he knows that the Jew will has need for this product, for this surplus. So then the Yid would not be allowed to have benefit. So he's quite adamant that no, even if the guy knows that you have need for or be interested in a cup of hot water, the answer is no. Oh, so one question: if there's Ari is asking a question, if burning challah is a mitzvah, why didn't you make a bracha on burning asheket shon? So I saw this question. I have a sefer called Chelkas Binyamin, a contemporary sefer, and he asks this question, and he brings an answer the following: that you make a bracha on a mitzvah done in the ideal way, but when you have challah, which for whatever undesired reason became impurified, so then that's not a desirable thing, and therefore we don't make a bracha on a mitzvah which is to kind of after a problem developed. So someone actually asked me last night, I said this word over, so he asked me on Arifas Egla, of Egla Arufa, not Egla Arufa, of Becher Peter Chamer, would you make a brocha sheket shom b'sveisa b'tzvonu la'arev egla? So I say I've never really been asked that question, so I don't know the answer. And also, Reb Aryeh is saying he worked with Hindus. There's no holiness associated with the hair being removed. That's so. Thank you for that. Our ritzus contain shellac from insects. It's the black malach l'mishim Sinai has to be kosher. Okay. When it comes to safra stuff, really, I leave it to the experts. So with that, I'm going to wish you all a good voch and a good chodesh and simchas benigla. You should see the geula of the Indian Eden who are Bashevi, and we should have a geula shleim of Klal Yisrael, Mashiach Tzidkenu, mismach geula li geula. Kol tov.
Kol tov.